Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers. Today, we're joined by a couple of special guests, and we're going to talk about end to what end? End-to-end testing, people. But before we go into our subject and onto our banter, let me introduce who we've got speaking today. So I'll introduce you first of all to our regular Tara.
Hello.
And to some of our special guests. So first of all, we've got Ben, the full stack tester.
Hello.
Welcome, Ben. And Al.
Hi there.
And that concludes who we've got today. So Ben has kindly been volunteered, sorry, that's the right one, isn't it? To ask us our banter question of the day. So Ben, what have you got in store?
Yeah, so my banter question today is coffee related. So I want to know both how you like to make coffee and how many various different ways you actually have available to you for making coffee. Or if you really don't like coffee, feel free to translate this to another drink.
I'm addicted to coffee. I drink a lot of tea too, so don't hold that against me. But I do have like the fancy, not like barista full fancy, but I do have a fancy one that lets me do the foamed milk and the so I can go hard into the coffee zone.
So, yeah, I'm a bit of a coffee addict too. I think it may be because we all work in IT, many of us might be. So I've got ways of making it styly. I've got stovetop, I've got cafetiere, I've got a bean to cup coffee machine, I've got a kettle for the instant coffee for the people that don't like very much. And I've also got like Tara milk frothers. I've got built-in milk frothers. So with all those things, I can make coffee virtually every way known to mankind, I think, apart from an AeroPress. I've avoided them. But I love coffee. My go-to is a flat white, but it's too much effort to make at home. So I just go for kind of a normal coffee with an espresso shot in it as well, just to make it extra strong. It needs to be strong.
I was gonna say, do you start off with just regular black coffee for the first one and then get fancy? Because that's what I do.
Nope.
I gotta have that first. I'm not awake yet.
It starts off with the same as it follows by, which is a normal coffee. So it's like two shots and then an extra espresso double in it as well. So I have a lot of caffeine in my life. So if I'm wired right now, you know why.
So for me, it's I'm an espresso man. So I have my favorite Nespresso capsules, and over the years since I had one, I used to have, or my wife and I used to have a big KitchenAid one that had a big arm, and you put the capsule in the top, and it was gigantic. We've now, unfortunately, that one I don't know, it got retired through use. Let's just put it that way. We now have one of those smaller kind of like little pixie things. And yeah, I've got it's the same every morning. It's put one of those in, drop the capsule in, and in 2 minutes I have coffee and a dash of milk. However, I'm not above, a Starbucks or a Costa going out and getting a latte. Usually the biggest one I can find if I'm out and about and I fancy a treat. But in a previous work, we used to have an urn, one of those ones that like did a drip feed. You could kind of like have those, but then if you left it out for too long, it would kind of stew a bit and it'd be a bit gross. So but these capsules, they're just great. It's a bit habitual because I only buy one sort of capsule. I used to like buy myriad and like mix and match, but now I'm very boring and it's the same one. And I can't even remember what it is, but it all looks the same. After you've had like five or six, it's kind of like yeah. So but I'm very much like you, Russell, and Tara. It's yes, I it is a habit. I am an addict.
Yes. Let's have a confession session later, I think. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, my wife would say I have too many ways to make coffee, but there's at least a couple more I want to have that I don't have. So I do have the AeroPress, and I have a pod machine, and I do use instant as well because while I have all these different ways to make coffee, sometimes I just need one quickly between meetings, so I just make a coffee. and I just use instant. And I used to have one of those, like a small version, I guess, of the kind of thing you have in an office, which is the jug with the filter, but it was still so big. It was like 12 or 14 cups that even though it's quite small, it's not tiny. I've ended up giving it to my mum and dad because they drink more coffee than me, and I'm more like because the rest of my household mostly doesn't drink coffee. Whereas now I drink more coffee from that machine because I go round to their house and I drink it because they don't live very far away. So it was a very strategic, hey, have this because I will drink more coffee from it because you have it. And that's pretty good. Like I like that. That worked very, very well as a tactic. Yeah, and I really like coffee made with freshly ground beans. Any different way you make it, cafetiere or AeroPress or the drip stuff, like the method is important, but what's more important is I really love it if the beans are freshly ground. Like that makes a big difference to me.
Mm.
So true.
But I do like, yeah, I love milk and sugar. So like I am a heathen. I don't drink the neat coffee. And I like the syrups. I like the caramels and the vanilla and all that kind of
I'm
stuff.
going off you,
So
Ben. I'm going off you.
yeah,
And
no,
you can
I
totally come have coffee at my house. I have all the different syrups lined
No,
up.
let's go.
please, please,
Anyway,
not the syrups. No, I can't
Hmm.
understand why anybody would want to do that. Like, what's this idea of putting a caramel shot in your coffee? It's like,
Because if you
what's this?
have if you have mass-produced beans that have been sat grounded forever, they're just bitter and you
so
gotta
don't get
fancy it
bad
up.
beans. Solution. You don't have to buy a secondary thing then. Anyway,
Hmm.
we're going to talk about coffee for the next 45 minutes. Anyone else on the podcast? Because it seems to be our a topic that we're all very enthused by. But I think I probably should step in before we do. But I am going to use a coffee analogy, I think, to help sort of lead us into the next part of the conversation around end-to-end testing. A little bit about what it is, why it is, where it is. And I was thinking, we just talked bean to cup. Is that end to end? Because in my head it isn't. In your head it may be, but it depends on what end it starts. Because I've got to put water into it. I've got to clean the filter in it. I've got to clean out the coffee grinds. I've got to kind of maintain it. So which part does it end? So I'm using a machine that we think of as start to an end process, but same goes for pod systems and things like that. So end to end testing, it does my head in because when someone says end to end, they think everyone knows the same thing. It doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And it always leads down to what start point to what end point are you referring to? Because it could be the smallest or the biggest. I'm going to lean away from talking about other types of tests that got similar name challenges to this one. Let's leave it on to end. But it doesn't half do my head in at times when people refer to end-to-end tests. Like, you need to write some end-to-end tests. Like, of what? What do you mean? That's where I always go to first of all. Why? If Chris was here, he'd have his post-it note on screen already saying why. But anyway, am I the only one that has a pet hate to the term?
Absolutely not. I think that is one of the things that I find to be right up there with when we complain about job titles and testing types. There's just so many words that mean nothing that are thrown out like spaghetti. And depending on who you're talking to, if you're talking to the sales guys, they're going to have a different definition of end to end versus the product guys. And I think QA in general is a little bit more holistic. To use your coffee analogy, I'm like, where'd you source the beans? What type did they come from? Like, are you using distilled water, right? How good is your data? Like, let's talk about the whole thing.
Yeah, the infrastructure, it goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I view end-to-end testing as a catch-all for user journeys. But even if you say user journeys, are you now talking about external actors or internal actors? So in some organizations, they have an internal customer base and they have an external customer base. So your external customer base may originate for, oh, I don't know, a bank account, for example. But internally, you have in various internal departments that may have their own user journey for running reports, doing financial reconciliation. So, what part of what journey is the end to end? So, I rather than look at it as a whole in my head, and certainly for my context, I break it up into user journeys, which are shorter So I may have, I don't know, a customer originates or a customer does a deposit as the external part, and the internal part is, and somebody might report on it. It's a separate thing, but it depends on how big or small you want to view an end-to-end ad.
But you've already framed it by saying user slightly better than end to end. It's giving you an idea that it's an end to end of, or a test that involves a user's journey. Where that starts and ends is still a bit abstracted away, but unless you put the full details in, you're never going to get full details. You've got to group things together in some logical naming. I get that. So by
Yeah.
starting to refer things as user journeys, though, that starts to have a slightly better understanding. To your point, though, there's different types of users, but at least it does help saying that actually, well, yes. And if we're talking generically, it's all users. If we're talking admin users, we're talking call center users, we're talking third-party users, we're talking API users, we can frame it into a context. But it's something better than just end-to-end, which is as good as saying tests in my head, at least.
So the way I think about this is in two parts, and it's very much a systems thinking part on one side and an architectural part on the other. So I think of it as end to end is the inputs and outputs of the part of the system you care about for this test. Now, some people will just call those system tests or system integration tests. Fine. But if you want to call them end-to-end tests, I would say end to end of the part of the system or the system, which could have sub and super systems, whatever, but it's end to end of the system that you care about, or the journey, as you say, Al, through that system that you care about by an actor, which could be a user or it could be a system process. And I would say that it implies that it's crossing multiple layers of architecture. So I would say it has input from some kind of interface, which might be and often is a user interface or a visual interface. Not always, doesn't have to be. It could still be an end-to-end test, but it has to be effectively the interface where someone who is completing the job, the task, the workflow, or something that's completing that workflow would normally input. Like it's not a test only input, which you might have with an isolated test like an API. It's the real input to the system, whatever that may be for you. And it crosses multiple layers. So it's using a system that has some actual persistence. It's using some system that has some actual processing. That might mean things are stored in a database. It might mean things go through an event queue. But it implies to me, if you're doing end-to-end testing, that there is an input and an output that crosses layers of architecture and goes between different points in your system that you particularly care about. I still think the name end-to-end doesn't necessarily get that point across well, and there are better names. But if I say end-to-end testing, then the next thing I say is, or if someone says end-to-end testing to me, is cool. What's the system we're testing so that we can figure out where the ends are? What layers of architecture are we crossing? Where are we going to make our assertions? Where are we going to make our observations?
Okay, so I was going to ask you with that definition how you applied it to microservices, but it sounds like you have those follow-up questions to say, give me more of the context when you're deciding those boundaries. I hate when we do end-to-ends on microservice. That's even more confusing.
What? Question, is it on that service or is it on multiple services combined into a system?
That's always the problem. Like, where's
Yeah.
the end?
And there often, for most systems, isn't an end to a system. There is often an end to a purpose or outcome, be it generating a report, resetting an account, doing whatever you do. An action, should we say, there's an end to, but a system is endless because people can use it infinitely, I would hope. Amazon, I assume, don't expect people just to end the system use. But I digress. It is an interesting, and we do need them. I think Ben points out a valid point into what they are and why. And this is the thing, we're using them to kind of combine things together most of the time. They're kind of a mixture of an integration test, of a user journey test together to kind of get an outcome. And I think we've framed language badly around them. And because of that, people that work around us, our product managers, our business people, utilize that language, and it causes confusion because, like many things, they think they're the be-all and end-all test. Actually, they are a test that's within our remit that has some value because it tests parts of systems integrated together, but it tests it often from a perspective of input to an output, a purpose, a goal, if for want of a better word, to what Al said, a user journey. It doesn't have to be user, therefore, frame it as a goal. But they are interesting because there's, we can do a unit test, we can check a bit of unit of code works, we can do a test of an API for a microservice and prove that the microservice is working as it is. Then we've got a UI layer on top of that. Then we've got all these other things. Each one we can test in isolation. And actually, I would encourage that in many ways to actually find fault fast. But there's an element of putting things together and how they work then. And it's a different type of test. You don't need a test. And then I think a trap I see a lot of teams go into is trying to write every single scenario in an end-to-end world. Whereas if you've got the right layers and the right tests elsewhere, you can actually just be testing that things are communicating, connecting, not the boundaries of every single scenario are connecting and every single route works. You should have tests elsewhere that prove the error message is the right text, for example. I wouldn't want to do an end-to-end test that checks all error messages are correct, because I can test that lower. And by this, I mean spelling, grammar, all this level of detail. I might want to check that it's triggered, but that's what I'm checking, not the finite and the minuteness. But anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And to build on that, I think the reason we end up using the word end-to-end test is because mission-orientated system integration test is a mouthful.
It's not as catchy, I have to be fair, yeah.
Which is what I would call them otherwise. It's not as catchy, right? So end-to-end test is a little bit easier off the tongue. But I would say one of the really important things that you said there is the purpose of these tests is not to catch every edge case. The purpose of this test is not to test every input with every output. That's really important. It's about making sure the flow through the system, or some flows through the system, can be successful, and that behavior holds together probably between multiple subsystems. So say your point, Tara, about microservices, probably the collection of multiple subsystems hold together. It's not about every combination and permutation. In fact, that's absolutely the worst anti-pattern to fall into with end-to-end tests, is trying to test many permutations and combinations. That's exactly the thing to avoid. Or trying to get a high level of coverage, right? Like, you absolutely should just have whole loads of things you don't cover at all. You just need to be covering whatever it is that makes you money, right? You really want to be covering to use your point earlier about the shopping company, I won't name again, brand, but like, you absolutely should be testing, can I buy a product? It doesn't mean that you need to test the login. It doesn't mean you need to test, I mean, you might have to in order to do the test. It doesn't mean you need to test the favorites or the recommendations or the n number of other features you have to get to buy a product. No, the reason you're making money is because you're selling products. So the thing that should be your end-to-end test is, can I get a purchase? Now, obviously, the system could be so big that your end-to-end test involves literally shipping a thing to a real person. Maybe that is your end-to-end test. Probably it is actually you raise the order and the fulfillment is a different system you test separately. You probably end at that. It's a good analogy, the shopping one.
Yeah, the shopping one does work with a lot of these things. I think often end-to-end tests, in my head at least, lead to kind of what you described there as more smoke tests of system, if that makes sense. They are going through a narrow subset of things. They're trying to check that things connect and work. They're a form of kind of a wider system integration, especially in the modern world of microservice galore, but also system integrations, the amount of third-party integrations we have to different things. And often we have limited environments and places we can test that integration. I appreciate that borders into end-to-end, but our user flow, an example I can give you is banks when they're doing certain validations to make sure you're not terrorist. An example, they have to go and check a third-party system against a terrorist watch list and all these other factors. And there's often suppliers that provide that and integration versus them building them all themselves. Why would you build a service when actually someone could build a service and sell it to every bank? Guess what? That's what's happened. So if you want to do a full flow of a new customer, if it has to be an end-to-end of the full flow, you're going to need to integrate and go through all these different things. You can mock it, you can stub it, and you will do that in a lower environment. But at some point, you might actually want to check that the user journey or the flow work. I would argue that's possibly a smoke test, but you could do that as an end-to-end test of that system. But you're limited often where you can run these end-to-end tests, because not every environment in our modern engineering practices allows all our systems to talk to each other. And one of the practices that as kind of an anti-pattern I've seen develop because of partly sometimes testers' desire, but also business expectations on end-to-end testing, is they want testers to spin up the entire world locally on a laptop and test everything works in an end-to-end test locally. And you're getting into quite big, large cloud systems now. We've got Docker, we've got some other tools that can allow us to do some of these things, but that is, in my head, an anti-pattern. We need to be doing them in the right place at the right time with the right resources, because it gets very easy to start adding another service. And microservice is a classic example where you're testing a couple of services together, that turns into 10 together, that turns into 20 together. And eventually your machine runs out. So yeah, I just think where kind of using the right point for the right value and getting the tests as low as possible is a great way of making sure you're using end-to-end tests appropriately. They're generally the slowest tests that we can do. Not always, but often, you know. So it's best to use them sparingly by having the test lower down and not get caught with, and I've done this. This is a bad habit of mine 10 years ago. Spoke to some business users and said what's the most important things for them that work, and then wrote those as end-to-end tests so that we could demonstrate to them the system worked the way they expected it. And so we didn't need them to be kind of doing regression every release. Fortunately, we should have done is taken that at the high level, then broken it down. But unfortunately, we wanted to demonstrate it and show it running to them, so we didn't, because we wouldn't be able to show them in the API test and all these other things.
I know that there's a lot of arguments about, you know, the testing pyramid and the testing trophy and all the 8 million different models that we have in regards to that. As I was teaching and enabling for the last couple of years, I always preached at people to use the smallest unit that they possibly could to achieve their goals. And I think that's, regardless of what you want to call it, is it the smallest and simplest thing that you can use to achieve your goal?
Good advice, definitely. What are you trying to validate, and has it been validated elsewhere is the other question I always try and ask. Inputs to fields, boundaries of fields are things that can be tested quite low down. Error messages.
I definitely notice a lot of people when they're writing their end-to-end tests they're just fluff. Like they're things that they've tested at a unit level and at an integration level, and I'm like, why are you running this really slow test when you've already checked it 5 other times in different areas?
What risk are you trying to mitigate? And I think that's a useful statement, almost to have a tattoo as a tester almost. Every test you run should be trying to mitigate a risk. If you're just running it and don't know why, or created it, maybe I should say, because sometimes you will run it without knowing why. But if you create it without knowing why, what risk you're mitigating, you might just be doing it for the sake of doing it. Or it might be
If you say
subconscious.
why too many more times, you're gonna summon crit.
It's my goal. Without him, someone has to be him.
Oh, okay.
So I want to flip the script a bit.
Do it.
End-to-end tests, whatever they are and whatever we call them, get a bad rap. Does anyone have any good stories about where your end-to-end tests have found good bugs or have been really important or like saved your ass? Because I think there's still some good value in them, even though we have all these rules we want to say, yeah, these are the things that you can go wrong, of which there are plenty. What's worked for you with end-to-end testing?
So that's a good one, Matt. So end-to-end tests, certainly within my current context, end-to-end tests are quite useful for trapping things that could lead to bad customer experience, where that kind of thing matters. So bad experience, an output is wrong, something that their customers shouldn't be able to do that they actually can, that kind of thing. The other interesting thing, that's external. Internal end-to-end tests are very useful, getting internal business processes and using those as an end-to-end test. So I don't know, running an internal business process that in such and such a situation, we want to be able to do this. And given context X, can that actually work with the solution, which invariably what it is? It's not a Lego brick, it's a Lego house. So I'm going to do analogies now as well. There we go. It's the does the business process work in that in the context that you're actually trying it in, or it comes up with something that now means that internal department A now has to go and rethink their process because things have changed slightly and they now need to rethink it rather than having to rethink it on the fly, because that can catch people out as well. So I guess there's certainly for me that there's two ways that it's absolutely certainly helped me. which is, does the solution provide a good or bad customer experience? And the other one is, internally, does it support an internal process as a test in itself, which is actually really useful.
Say that the end-to-ends that have helped me the most have been in the situations where it has to go through certain checkpoints to be able to even matter further down the line. I worked at the beginning of COVID, I worked on heart monitors. And in order for physicians and patients to get notifications, like we didn't want to just send a panic message to a patient before alerting their doctor, hey, this has happened on their heart monitor. And so making sure that all of those kind of gates were hit first, you have to run it all the way through because you can't just be like, okay, pretend like there was an event. Right? And you can in a small system, but then did it go through all the other checks first? And those larger processes they're just so hard to mock up and make consistently applicable, if that's the right word. So having those end to ends where you can regularly say, we've ran it from the start to finish, we know exactly what's going to happen, things exited where they were supposed to, it's working in full, has been really kind of my go-to example.
I can think of a couple, but I'm gonna, I guess, pivot it a little bit because it goes back to what I was saying before. I've probably found them most useful most of the time when I've had conversations with stakeholders, business users, and alike, understanding their processes, and not necessarily then for automating them as they are, but by actually having a conversation around a journey, an end-to-end element, to understand what their business process is around it. So an admin in the back end panel, for example, of a system where you're trying to fix problems or something like that. Or we need it, like people call us in with these problems and we deal with it like this currently. So when we're replacing systems and we're assuming that we have got everything covered, it's been fantastic at kind of gap analysis and those sort of situations because we're so focused on a ticket has done what it said it was going to do that we've missed the purpose of the actual thing, and there's no level of business detail. And this is a lot of it is comes links back to sort of business analysts, and I'm seeing certainly seeing less business analysts in the world. So that's fallen more onto us. So by having the conversations and writing down at the high level what the journeys are and things like that, it's allowed us as testers to spot gaps that maybe an end-to-end test would have solved, but or it may be that actually our wider testing has solved, and there's definitely saved us from them. And I know at least one scenario of kind of different type of user that no one had planned or talked about that exists in our system that we all forgot about. And they went, well, yeah, but what about these people? And we went, well, they're not in the ticket. They're not, we haven't been asked to do anything for them. It's like, well, legally, we can't just shut them out of the system on day X when you release this feature. No, good point. We can't. Okay, let's figure this one out, and so on. So, if we'd written that as an end-to-end test, we would have found it there as well. But because we had the conversation, we actually found it by having the conversation. And I think that's where I found them to be critical. But yeah, in the writing the test, it would have also found it, be it manually executed or other thing. But yeah, they are like, I know I had a big sort of thing. I hate the term more than I hate the test. It has to be said. User journeys, visions of different things, patterns, ways things work, really valuable. But the terminology annoys me.
I think there's a assumption that goes along with the terminology, though, that an end-to-end test is something that is automated and in your pipeline. And so often, like you've said, for me, it's the conversation, the planning, all of the other quality steps that go into testing that end to end that are so much more important than some, script that may or may not be applicable 6 months from now.
Absolutely. I was going to mention a similar thing that, like, that assumption that it's automated is interesting because there is an assumption with the terminology, and there's also an assumption that it's driven by a UI, which doesn't have to be the case. I also think that the challenge we have is that end to end as a strategy can be used alongside other types of testing. It isn't mutually exclusive. So often the reason we're struggling is we're calling something an end-to-end test, but that doesn't mean it isn't an integration test. That doesn't mean it isn't a system test. It might be all these things. And that's where the terminology really breaks down, is an end-to-end way of testing doesn't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive from other testing. And also, to pick up on what you were saying, Russell, what I find with a lot of testing and a lot of automation is the process we go through to learn the system in order to build the test is where we find, or where I find, more of the big bugs and most important problem than running the test. What I find is that the executing of the end-to-end test is really valuable because it will tell me very quickly when the deployed system in the environment I'm running against is so catastrophically broken. I like it's a like you don't need many of them. You need at least one end-to-end test that makes sure it goes all the way through checking that anything is persisted in the database, because they're really great for showing catastrophic failure. And it might not even be that the particular thing you're trying to test is the thing that it might fail for the wrong reason. All other tests at all other levels, you can do a really good job of isolating things so they fail for the right reason. End-to-end tests, you have no chance, but the thing it finds might still be really important. At least it has been in my experience.
Yeah, an end-to-end test doesn't mean the entire life cycle of a system. Like an end-to-end test could literally be a sign-up flow. You're into the system. That's an end-to-end test of a nature. It's not that you go into the system, you search for a product, you find a product, you do that. That is an end-to-end, but that's a really long, big, complicated end-to-end. You've tested both the sign-up flow entirely, and you probably do that in every single test often. Then you go in and you tested kind of the search functionality. You've done quite a lot of different things end-to-end. Whereas you've got to figure out where it starts and finishes and what's business critical, because it could be that your marketplace is that you need to get trials. So actually the trial flow, I'll call it, is market critical for you because you need to get that. So actually it's not just sign up, it's that you complete the trial wizard and get to the end of it. Because great, you could sign up, great, the trial wizard works, but if the two don't work together, it's dead for your business. So you would have to kind of incorporate that a bit further. But yeah, you've got to be conscious that if taking payments is the most critical thing, often you're going to want a bit more of a flow to check that that works properly. Because if it goes down, your business goes down. Therefore, it becomes a bit of a critical. It links back to smoke testing and other things we've mentioned. But think of what's important to your business. And if you ask someone in the business, they'll answer everything 90% of the time.
It makes me think about what Al said, where you're talking about user journeys, because that also just kind of pulls me into the idea of a persona, right? You say the user journey might be logging in, but logging in as a seller versus as a buyer are vastly different expectations, right? Having access to different things. And I always think about, well, yeah, that flow is tested, but only for one persona. So we know login works, but what if you're logging in as, an admin? Vastly different.
Yeah, no, they're classic examples of the different systems and different places you end up in often and different experiences and access control. Access control is a classic one for thinking, because each individual system might have implemented it slightly differently, causing problems, especially in microservice worlds. Like whether you can get in or not might be Boolean and simple, but whether you have the right level of things in each part gets a bit more messy. From my experience, it often goes wrong. Where you've got little complicated things that have a big impact, they're the ones that I worry about most.
It's interesting that as we've been talking about this, the one thing that I was kind of thinking about is how do we reflect back out to stakeholders and delivery leads, BAs, execs, whoever, other areas of the business, what exactly is that if we say end to end, we probably, there's almost like you can't go for like the dictionary definition because it could change every project, it could change. This time round, there is no UI, to Ben's point. Another time, there is a UI. So now the question is at some point when we're thinking about what we're going to test, how we're going to test it, these nuances of we're breaking the journey up, we're doing this, but this really means this. It all needs documenting out and kind of like laying out in order to, in a way that actually makes it understandable to people that goes, oh, right. So when they say end-to-end test, they're talking about, I don't know, I'm going to go back to my context, internal and external customer journeys. Okay, cool, right? Or we're going to test a system, it's a system process this time. Okay, cool. So once we lay that out, then you can go into, okay, what are the boundaries of what that actually now means? Where does it start? Where does it stop? What's the goal of whatever it is that we're actually doing for per layer? So Dara's point about how do you avoid repeating yourself, I would say, It's by being very careful about how you lay out what it is you're actually doing, so that if there is overlap, at least it's explainable in that, well, actually, this might look like it's overlapping, but actually, if you look over here, this is a goal and it's slightly different to when we did it over here. And the idea of an end-to-end test is to still test something specific. It needs to be able to pass or fail in its own atomic. Just because you're marching through the system and what is it that you're actually testing? Are you testing that a certain process behaves a certain way when you do a certain thing? The fact that you're interacting with, I don't know, a login, some kind of database persistence, you're not actually really testing these things. You're just merely interacting with them. There are other tests lower down that do that bit, but you need to explain that as well in order to make it kind of relatable. You don't really want to have to like redraw the testing pyramid and go, this bit's here and this bit's here, but
I think though you do have to.
there's something maybe an infographic of some kind might help that. I don't know.
Partly maybe it's infographic, but I think it's just having conversations about layers and explaining, because there's a perception that's not fair, I think, on testers and other people, and we continue it to a degree, accidentally, not maliciously or anything. But end-to-end tests are always be all and end all sometimes, and they are valuable, but they're not necessarily called the right thing. We've got to use slightly better language. I don't mean we need to be too pedantic about these things, but if we're doing user journeys, then that's what they are. If we're doing mission-based integrated system tests or MIST, which I think if you use cool acronyms, they might catch on better, because E2E is why end-to-end testing, I think, works so well. But I think we just have to call things out a little bit, and we have to remind people that the only test that exists doesn't have to be an end-to-end test. And actually, we've got unit tests, we've got integration, we've got system integration tests, we've got all sorts of different things that are out there to catch different things at different point with lovely little titles. Our job is to work out the best place to put a test as a team, not just as testers, to catch the risk that we've identified. And yes, naming is frustrating at times because end-to-end has become this, like, I was a contractor and the amount of businesses that asked me, oh, well, yeah, we need end-to-end tests. I was like, yes, you do, but not many. So, oh, and we need loads. It's like, no, let me explain. And some of this is about explaining to stakeholders a bit more, because like once upon a time when you did these things manually through a UI, it was a lot more necessary to do a bit more of a system end-to-end flow to get, you had to log into it, you had to do these things. That world, I think we've shifted from. Not fully, and there's always different reasons that different people in different places, but we have shifted by and large, and that's made the, I'm going to call it, more traditional conceptual idea of end-to-end tests fade a little bit, like where user acceptance tests were being written as end-to-end tests, all those things, because that's what they've become in my head, at least. Anyway.
I have a question for you, and that is, do you think that an over-reliance on end-to-end tests is a smell or an indication that the system has low testability?
50-50. Low testability or less strategically well-aimed testing. It could be because it's not testable, or it could be because the strategy and the skill set of the testers and the business has been to steer it. As I said, as a consultant, I was contractually obliged to write lots of them in a couple of cases because of the contract. It wasn't because anyone wanted them, but it was signed up early by salespeople because that's what the business wanted to hear. And then we end up having to deliver it. We could try and renegotiate, but it was hard because they had a perception which was hard to change. So I think it can sometimes be a system, and I think sometimes it's a bad sales job of testers and strategies and so on, in my view. Tara, though?
Yeah, I was to say, I think a lot of the teams that I've worked on that have relied heavily on end-to-end is because they've either been told that's the only way to get there, right? Or teams have shifted so far left that the developers are doing it, and that's all they know is slap it in something like Playwright, Cypress, whatever, put it in the CI/CD and move on with your life. I see it a lot with teams that don't have actual testing and QA in place.
What do you think, Ben, to your own question? Out of curiosity, what's your experience?
I think that it is a potential smell. I do think that I have definitely seen the overuse of end-to-end tests not because the teams didn't know that unit and integration tests or tests at a different level were possible, but because they were, for some reason, hard to write or they weren't giving the confidence that people feel they needed. The testability was low, and some of that testability comes from genuine technical barrier, and some of that testability comes from ignorance of the art of the possible, to steal a line from Callum. But I definitely think there is a place for end-to-end tests. I once said the line, the best number of end-to-end tests is exactly one. I don't entirely believe that's true in every circumstance. I was trying to be a bit controversial, but I do.
Horrible, Ben.
It's like that's the optimal number of end-to-end tests is exactly one. But then I also have many ways to make coffee. So what do I know?
Yeah, the optimal ways to make coffee. One, two. But yeah, it depends on the risk, I think. I know what you're trying to steer towards, and I know that you didn't mean it literally. Al, how about yourself, sir?
It's an interesting one, Matt, because you could find yourself in a context where you have services being built and they don't all necessarily they should talk to each other, and everybody has the endpoints and things like that. But I think that there is something to be said of something tangible that you could test stuff as a sit and you could mock, and that's okay. And in a way, that is, I suppose, an end to end of sorts because you've gone through various services that might talk to each other, but you're still mocking something on the end. I don't. I think it's 6 and 2 3s in regards whether it's a smell. To Ben's point, what is it that the business that you're working in needs? In an ideal world, you want testing everywhere, right? You want testing low down, close to the code. You want testing processes and journeys higher up as well. And in an ideal world, yes, they don't overlap and they don't repeat each other. Sometimes that's harder to avoid than others. But yeah, I'm very much in the 6 and 2 3s camp. I can see arguments as to either way. Certainly from what I've seen, there is value in them, but they need to be the right level and they need to be discreet so that they are faster to run, that you're not trying to test all the things in one go. You need to be able to test certain things in order to make end-to-end or journey tests faster. You need to be able to go, I'm doing this, and this is my goal. I'm doing this, and doing this, and this is my goal. And there's a variable there that allows you to be able to tell the difference between what it is you're testing rather than going, I'm going to look here and I'm going to look here and I'm going to look here. And I'm basically going to test everything all the time, every single time I touch the system, rather than focusing on individual aspects. You could do some of that lower down. Some of it you can't. Some of it you have a third party supplier that will deliver something. Now you've got to integrate or end-to-end test their bit with your bit. They will have done their testing. They will have given you their test approach and their test outputs, but you now need to check that it works for your context, not their mocked development environment, which won't necessarily talk to yours.
As we're sitting here talking, I can think of several pieces of software I use as a user that I think, have you guys never act product when you tested it? So, maybe there's a lot more value in actually making sure everything works from literally end to end as much as humanly possible.
I mean, there is a liability question here as well when you're dealing with that kind of thing is that ultimately whose name's on the door when whatever it is gets pushed out to production and people start using it. So it's risk. We're back to that. It's risk.
I have a story time on this one, which is one of the best end-to-end tests I've ever seen run, and it was not automated. Is we had a problem at one of the companies I worked for quite a long time ago where we were getting all these complaints that it was basically hard to actually license the product. And our engineering manager at the time got out his credit card, went to the front end of the website and just went and tried to buy the product. He just went and tried to buy the license and buy the product and basically waited for it to happen for real. He didn't get involved. He didn't ask anyone. He didn't show like flex anything. And he just tried to buy the product. And it was so cool, the investigation afterwards, when that took ages and was problematic and it was rubbish. Things changed after that, and that was probably the best single end-to-end test I've ever seen. Was like, say, this high-level engineering manager was just like, yeah, here's my credit card, let's just buy one for real and see if we get it. And that was brilliant. Like, that was the perfect one-time end-to-end test, and it was great.
Was the issue performance there, out of curiosity, and ultimately, or
There were many complex and awkward
okay,
issues with how we literally generated the license files. I will
okay,
tell you over a pint someday. I shouldn't really go into
no,
the
no, that's
detail
fine.
why it was bad.
No, well, all I was going to say is between the four of us there, I think we all concluded in some form or other that it's a smell of some sort if you're over reliant upon these things, be it technical debt, complexity, skill sets, business challenges, and other things. They are valuable, however, end-to-end tests. We could probably get away with calling them different things at different times. I think some of the examples I've used and others have used here are integration tests of some sort and things like that. So just remember to call things by what their purpose is. They're trying to make sure things work together. They're trying to make sure that a flow works, etc., etc. I think we could do a lot of good by slightly calling them something different. I think it would help people understand more and it'll save pain.
I think that's a good place for us to wrap. Yeah. So whether it's your word choice or just asking a lot of questions of why, how do you define end to end? I'm sure we'd all love to know. So thank you for joining us here today on this episode of Testing Peers. Thank you, Al and Ben, for joining us as well. Listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, concerns. As always, you can find us on LinkedIn or email us at contactus@testingpeers.com.
Goodbye.